stuff of thought tries to use language as a window into human nature. What can we learn about what makes us tick from words and the way we use them? For example, what can we learn about our conceptions of space, time, and causality from our use of prepositions, tense markers, and verbs? What can we learn about our emotions from swearing and other kinds of taboo language? What can we learn about human social relationships from innuendo and euphemism and other ways in which we use language indirectly? One example is the way we use causative verbs, verbs that express one person bringing about an effect. It turns out that we can only use transitive verbs to express causation when the causation is intended and direct. So if someone turns down a dimmer switch and the lights dim, we can say he dimmed the lights. If someone puts on the toaster and the lights dim, we can say he caused the lights to dim, but we can't say he dimmed the lights. The verb dim requires that the causation be direct and intended. That seems to be the prototypical concept of causation that people use, and we see it in domains other than language. For example, in whom we hold morally responsible and whom we punish in the criminal justice system. If someone punches someone else, they have to go to the hospital, and then because of a medical error, he dies of an infection in the hospital. The person who did the punching caused the death of the victim, but we tend not to hold him guilty of murder in that case. Again, because the causation was indirect. There were too many links in the causal chain. So the same notion of causation that governs our use of verbs also governs our sense of moral responsibility. Another example of how language can be a window onto our mental life is in the use of indirect speech, such as polite speech. Why do you say, if you could pass the salt, that would be awesome, instead of give me the salt? It doesn't make much sense. It's an overstatement. It's a contemplation of a hypothetical world in a case where you just want something to happen. The logic is, though, that if you give people a direct imperative, you're presupposing that they'll comply with your command. You're treating them as some kind of underling or flunky, and it implies that you have a relationship of dominance over them. We're very mindful of seeming to exert dominance over someone else. And so by using indirect speech, by uttering a non sequitur that we guess that our listener will interpret in the correct way, we can both convey that we want the salt, but without issuing an imperative. And that tells us that people are always mindful of what relationship type holds between them and their listener, and they craft their words to do two things at once: to get a message across, but also to make it completely clear which of several relationship types is currently in force. Another example of how we can use language to probe our emotional lives, to tie into affective neuroscience, is to look at swearing, a strange phenomenon in which people get an emotional response from hearing certain words that they've heard before. They get the sense that there's something immoral about using those words, even though no one's ever shown how the uttering of a word could corrupt anyone's morals. If you look at the common denominator behind taboo words across languages, they always involve some kind of negative emotion. And by looking at swear words, you can see what are the kinds of negative emotions that humans are prone to. And they include the emotion of disgust, and as we see in the large number of taboo terms, for bodily secretions and the organs that produce them, presumably because the emotion of disgust is a defense against infection by parasites and pathogens that use bodily secretions as a vector. And exactly those bodily secretions that tend to give rise to taboos are those that epidemiologists tell us are common disease vectors. We also have taboos surrounding sexuality, suggesting that sex is a fraught subject in human emotional life. We're appalled by depraved sexual acts. There are many taboo terms for racial and ethnic minorities and for other kinds of despised peoples like enemies and heretics and infidels, which tap into the emotion of hatred and contempt. And by looking at all of the major categories of swearing and taboo, you get a list of the major human negative emotions.